Hey, and welcome back. This article is entitled Trying to Change Your Behavior. That's the problem. You're trying to change your behavior. That's the problem. And I wrote this article because so many of us, and rightfully so, think that if we want to change our behavior, we focus on changing the behavior. And I know that sounds so logical and it's what we want to do, but it's not what actually works. And so, what I dive in to here is the 3 seconds where change actually happens. It's not the outside awareness. It is bringing that awareness into the moment so you can create change. Okay, here we go. Most people change, well, let's start with the title again. You're trying to change your behavior. That's the problem. Most people approach change backwards. It's not that our intentions are bad. We want to change. It's just that we place our attention on the wrong thing. In order to change behavior, we focus on behavior, which seems to make sense until you learn a little bit more about how actions work. There's a very common model in coaching and psychology that says your thoughts drive your emotions, which drive your actions. So the actions are the downstream thing from your thoughts and emotions. So if you try to change your actions without first changing your thoughts, you're essentially fighting an uphill, generally very unwinnable battle. Your brain has to be on board. Your thoughts have to work with the action you want to take. Once most of us learn this, we go hard into self reflection and then affirmation mode. We ask questions like, what thoughts would I need to think in order to get to the gym or feel empathy instead of rage or reach for my paints instead of the phone at night? Again, this seems to make sense on the surface, but it often fails to work, which is confusing to us, right? Because it feels like we just got the keys to the kingdom and then those keys don't work anymore. Something critical is missing here. It's not your intellectual thoughts that drive behavior in the moment. I want to say that again. So the critical thing that's missing is that your intellectual thoughts, that thinking part of your brain, those thoughts don't drive behavior in the moment. This is why awareness of thoughts, emotions, and behavior doesn't automatically lead to change. There are two main parts of your brain. Again, this is very simplified. The thinking prefrontal cortex part and the reacting survival amygdala part. When you're reflecting, projecting, and planning, you're using the prefrontal cortex. When you're in the familiar pattern, the amygdala is in charge. This matters because the thoughts you're thinking with your prefrontal cortex don't automatically filter down to the amygdala. Those parts of your brain don't always talk. And the thoughts you think out of the moment are often very different from the thoughts you think in the moment. So your prefrontal cortex has a different opinion of the behavior than your amygdala. But you, in fact, are the operator. You're the person behind both of these parts. And you can actually translate between those parts of your brain. And you have a 3 second window where you get to do that work. This 3 second window that's crucial for change is after the trigger, but before the reaction. And that window of time, two things become possible if you can interrupt yourself compassionately and regulate. So we're not being mean to ourselves when we interrupt. We're interrupting compassionately. We're pausing gently. So the first thing is you get to learn what thoughts are localized and specific to this behavior with this trigger in this nervous system state. It's very specific. Most of us are quick to dismiss these in the moment thoughts because they sound silly, childish, and illogical. But like a child who's scared in their dark but very safe room, the thoughts you're having are true to that part of you. You need to pay attention to what they are. Just because they're illogical doesn't mean they're not there. And then two, you get edit rights to those thoughts. So in that moment, if you can regulate and you can listen, you actually can change them in that moment. This is the only moment when you can actually go into this part of your brain and repattern the existing neural pathways from earlier in life. The key to changing behavior comes down to regulation, validation, and self empathy in that specific moment. It sounds a lot like reparenting yourself. So I was talking with a client the other day who often becomes a note taker in big meetings. She wants to speak up, she has something to offer, but in the moment, she can't seem to find the words. Her approach before we started working together was forcing herself to speak up, but she nearly always overcorrected and was louder and more aggressive than she wanted to be. Plus, it was exhausting trying to force that behavior, and the change and resolve never lasted for more than a few minutes, right? So she would force herself to speak up a little bit, but then she'd go right back into note taker mode. Here's what implementing this process in the moment looked like for her. So she's preparing to walk into the meeting room or join the Zoom. That's the trigger, right? The meeting is the trigger. She pauses. She reminds herself she's safe. And I know that sounds silly, but reminding yourself you're physically safe is just such a game changer. She takes a few slow breaths. She repeats this until her body starts to feel calmer on the inside. This is what regulation is. When she starts to ask what's happening in my body, what's happening in my thoughts, what's going on in my emotions. Now she's starting to get curious. In that moment, it turns out that she is feeling scared. She's terrified that she's going to be abandoned for speaking up. She's going to be rejected when she does this. She's afraid that no one will like her if she contributes. This story has deep roots, which we're not going to explore here in this story, but just know that you can explore them later. But in the moment, what she says is she doesn't debate them. She doesn't try and convince them. She says, I hear you. You're afraid. Right then, she's validating herself and she is in the place of self empathy. A really cool thing has happened here. Not only has she learned what the real concern is, right? Her brain talked to her, but she's created safety for herself in that moment. And that means that her prefrontal cortex can and does rejoin the party. So she can remind herself that she's safe and that she is welcome at this table. She knows she's welcome here. She was hired for her opinion, right? And she knows that in her intellectual brain. Now she can help her amygdala understand it. She asks, if I was safe, if it was safe, if I was going to be accepted, how would I show up? And the most amazing thing is that without forcing or focusing on the behavior, her behavior changes. She speaks up naturally in the meeting because she has something to say. She becomes the person she wants to be in that meeting because she finally felt safe enough to be that person. This approach goes against a lot of advice that you've probably heard about willpower and motivation and habit stacking and all those things. But if that advice worked, you wouldn't still be listening to this. This is what phase two of self development actually looks like. It's not more discipline, it's not better affirmations, it's not forcing the behavior until it sticks. It's a building the capacity to meet yourself in the moment with regulation, with curiosity, with a kind of empathy that you'd offer somebody that you love, like a friend, a partner, a child, so that the behavior you want becomes available to you. You're not trying to override the part of yourself that's scared or feeling some other emotion. You're trying to get them on board because when they feel safe, they don't need to be forced. They just show up. If this is landing, if you're nodding along, if you're thinking that could be me in that meeting or some other situation like that, I want you to comment here or send me a message. Um, Join me over on my website. I'd love to talk to you. You're my people. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time.